The biggest challenge that this country faces, in my view, is First Nations poverty. Right? Our people are too poor, simply put. If one were to ask me, what do you mean too poor? I would point to them that, as the Auditor General, Sheila Fraser, said just a few years ago, there's a housing crisis in First Nation communities. It's a serious crisis, and we need to do something about that. I would point to them that we don't enjoy the same kind of access that ordinary Canadians have to quality health care. Just one example, 4 communities in the northeastern part of Manitoba, 10,000 people. Every mother that gives birth has to be flown out of the community because there are no facilities for mothers to have their babies in those 4 communities. I would point to you some of the highest suicide rates anywhere in the world. I was just went to visit Attawapiskat Tribal Council, and one of the chiefs told me, very small community, 600 people, they've had 26 suicides in the last number of years. 278 in that part of the province in northern Ontario. 278. We're losing far too many of our young people, and it's usually young men between the ages of 24 and 14. But in Manitoba now we have kids killing themselves. 2 brothers, 8 and 11, that committed suicide. And all that speaks to is the despair in our communities, particularly among our young. Too many of our communities have poor schools. I went to Attawapiskat just a couple of months ago. 1,200 people, there are 400 plus school-aged children there. Their school was condemned 8 years ago. And they've just been told that not to expect a new school for at least another 5 years, if not longer. And when the government first condemned the school, the price tag put to building a new school was $17 million. Today it's $30 million. What will it be 5 years and beyond? $40 million? And so when I was at that community, the kids there came to me where I was at the band office, pleading with me to get them a new school. So when I came south, I called the departmental officials and told them of my visit and what I had just witnessed. And they told me, as bad as that community was, there are many, many more in the Ontario region that are worse off than this community, right? And so here we are talking about children. These children represent our future. And of course the expectations that are placed on those kids are the same as we place on kids that go to school in Ottawa, Toronto, and in any city of the country. But they're expected to do as well as kids out, in the urban communities. Not a chance. And of course, if they fail, we will hold them responsible. And we will hold their communities responsible. So completely unfair. I talked about safe drinking water and the fact that there are over 100 communities, First Nation communities, that operate under boil water advisories. So what is the response to that? Well, one first response is to blame chief and council, right? Well, we didn't pollute and contaminate our water source. It's someone else that did that. But we're expected to fix that. We're expected to fix that. We're expected to make sure that we have trained plant operators, that we have a regulatory regime in place, that we have capacity within our communities, make sure that we have safe drinking water. We're talking here about the health and safety of kids and moms and dads and grandparents, community people. We can't give that kind of assurance to our people because the housing is so bad, the provision of healthcare services is so erratic. The schools are in terrible shape. We don't have safe drinking water, and so many of our people are unemployed, right? And those are the manifestations of poverty, right? But in spite of that, we have tremendous success stories, right? In 20,000 small businesses owned and managed by our people, close to 30,000 people of our people in universities, We have doctors, lawyers, you name the profession and discipline, we have people there. And doing good work, making a real contribution to Canada's prosperity. But we can do more. We can do more. And I realize that it's not simply about more money, but that is one of the answers. Look at the military here, right? We could have argued with them that it's not simply more money, but that's the argument they put, and we bought that. We should try and create the same kind of transformative change when it comes to Aboriginal people and First Nations people, so that all Canadians can be proud of us. So all Canadians can know that we're being treated fairly, and that all Canadians will know that we're being treated with respect. And here I come to you here this evening. I'm the National Chief for the Assembly of First Nations, representing First Nations people, distinct peoples with rights that are unique to us. We're the only peoples in this land that have treaties with the federal crown. Yet I have to convince the federal government year after year on the legitimacy of the community I represent, the legitimacy and validity of this organization to represent all First Nations people. And if I speak out of turn, I'll get punished. I'll get punished, right? And so what I face now, this organization that is as legitimate and as valid as you here, senators, representing the Senate, or the opposition parties, or the government, the members of Parliament, and our public institutions here, just as legitimate. I've been told, maybe because I haven't been good, right, or good enough, that our funding will be reduced over the next 5 years by $5 million, right? But the expectations that will be placed on us will be just as onerous as they are now, right? And why should we have to operate in this kind of environment? Look at languages and culture, important to all peoples, right? If you lose your language, you lose so much of what you are. We had a commitment from the previous government for $172 million to preserve and enhance Indigenous languages over 10 years. That was deleted with a stroke of a pen, because the money was needed elsewhere, right? And the elsewhere was the $37 billion that's been now applied against the debt in the last 3 budgets. I don't think that's fair. That's simply unfair. And I don't want to fight with governments, Senator Siegel and other senators here. That's not my job. I'm National Chief not to fight with governments. I'm National Chief to work with governments, regardless of political stripe, to make a better life for the people I represent, to make Canada a better place, to remind Canadians and Canada that it has to respect the human rights of all of its citizens, that it can't pick and choose on the human rights that it will support. Why are our human rights of less value? Why are government people saying to Canadians that the chiefs and councils and the Assembly of First Nations don't believe in human rights? Because now we're trying to delay the repeal of Section 67. Not true. All we've asked for, sir, is that we be given the same kind of consideration as all governments were given here when the Charter was brought into force. 3 years. 3 years. We were offered 6 months. Yet we have less capacity than any government in the land to deliver on the requirements and the provisions of the Charter. And look at us here. And so who is being painted as the enemy here? Chiefs and councils. We have 109 women chiefs, approximately 800 women councillors. Do you think those women chiefs and councillors are opposed to the repeal of Section 67? Of course not. But they also want their governments to be treated fairly, so that these provisions will be available to all of our First Nations citizens in the best possible way. So that's a challenge we have together here. We don't want more, right, than ordinary Canadians have. But we certainly want to receive what ordinary Canadians expect and in fact receive from their governments.